The text message from my son Jake arrived at 7:23 a.m. on a Tuesday. Mom, can we talk? It's urgent about the house situation. I set down my coffee and stared at the screen. At 62, I'd learned that urgent from my 28-year-old son usually meant he needed money. Again. My name is Linda, and I'm about to tell you how I almost lost my home trying to save my adult children from themselves. Before I continue this heavy story, tell me in the comments what your name is and where you're listening from. I want to know who these brave people are who have the courage to hear the raw truth of life. Because this story I'm about to tell isn't for just anyone. It's a story that will affect you in ways you might never have expected. But I need to tell it because I know there are other women out there going through what I went through. And maybe my courage will give them courage too. Every word I speak here is true. Every detail actually happened. And if you stay until the end, you'll understand why it took me so long to have the courage to talk about it. It started small, as these things always do. 3 years ago, my son Jake lost his job. The panic in his voice was a physical thing I could feel through the phone. He came over for dinner, but he couldn't eat his favorite lasagna. He stared at my checkered tablecloth and said the words I'd learned to dread. Mom, I just need help with rent this month. He was my boy, with his father's hazel eyes, and in them I saw a flash of the child who'd tried so hard not to cry when he fell. $400 seemed like nothing, a necessary bridge. I had savings from 40 years of nursing. My house was paid off. What was a mother for, if not to be a safe harbor? Of course, honey, I said, my heart swelling with a purpose that had been missing since Frank died. Don't even worry about it. But 1 month became 2, then 3. The checks continued, a silent monthly ritual that began to feel less like a bridge and more like a toll I was paying to keep his despair at bay. Meanwhile, my daughter Sarah's life was unraveling. 31, recently divorced, a single mom with 2 kids under 6. Her exhaustion was a palpable entity. She sat on my living room sofa, tears tracing a path down her cheek she swiped away angrily. I hate asking, she whispered. But if I can't afford the babysitter, I can't go to class. How could I say no? Her plea was about sheer survival. So, another few hundred here and there. I told myself I was being supportive. I was the family bedrock. I started a mental ledger. Jake, rent. Sarah, babysitter. I called it my family fund, a gentler term that made me feel less like an ATM. But the rhythm of their needs began to dictate the rhythm of my days. The phone would ring, and a knot would form in my stomach. The gratitude became shorter, more perfunctory. The "I'll pay you back" promises began to sound like a recording everyone knew was fiction. I started to notice things. Jake posted pictures from a new brewery with friends. I'd mentally calculate the cost of those craft beers against the rent money. Sarah mentioned new shoes for the kids. A necessary expense. But a little voice whispered, were the old ones really that worn out? I silenced the voice, ashamed of my own pettiness. The first real crack appeared on my birthday. For years, the kids had always taken me to dinner. That year, the day came and went. Jake called, excited about a second interview. Sarah called, stressed about a midterm. Neither mentioned dinner. By 7 o'clock, I was eating a tuna sandwich alone at the kitchen table. The message was clear. The financial support had somehow replaced other expressions of love. The loneliness of that thought was breathtaking. I decided to try and broach the subject. I invited them both for a Sunday lunch. But the moment they arrived, the dynamic was set. Sarah was defensive, arms crossed. Jake was dismissive. Mom, relax. It's temporary. To press the issue would be to accuse them. So I served the pot roast. The unspoken words hung in the air. I had become an enabler. The second year was the year of the slow leak. The requests grew larger. Jake needed a down payment for a car, $5,000. Sarah's landlord sold her rental, requiring a new security deposit, $4,000. My savings account, once a deep well, was now a pond I could see the bottom of. A cold, sharp fear took root in my chest. What about my roof? My health? I started saying no to myself. I canceled the Symphony subscription. I put off replacing my thumping, dying washing machine. Every dollar I spent on myself felt like a dollar I was stealing from my children's stability. The resentment became a constant, low-grade fever. I began to see my children not as Jake and Sarah, but as financial liabilities. Their calls were potential withdrawals. I'd see Jake's name on the caller ID, and my pulse would quicken with dread. The breaking point came on a bright Tuesday morning. I opened a credit card statement for an account I rarely used. The balance was thousands of dollars. My first thought was identity theft. But as I scanned the charges, electronics stores, fancy restaurants, airline tickets to Las Vegas, I saw the truth. They were all near Jake's apartment. The Vegas trip was one he'd called a well-deserved break. The room tilted. I sank to the floor in the hallway. It wasn't theft, it was betrayal. While I ate tuna sandwiches and listened to my washer die, he was buying rounds of drinks and flying to Vegas. The anger that rose was white-hot and terrifying. It burned away everything, the guilt, the anxiety, leaving a devastating clarity. The pattern wasn't just a pattern, it was an exploitation. And I had allowed it. I didn't call him. I got in my car and drove, tears blurring the world, until I found myself at Frank's grave. What do? I whispered to the cold granite. I cried for my lost savings, for my broken relationships. I saw I had been weak. I had traded short-term peace for long-term ruin. I drove home, hollowed out but clear-eyed. I went to Frank's old desk and took out a clean pad of paper. At the top, I wrote, "A new pattern." I did the math. It was brutal. I had enough to live on only if the leaks stopped. Now. The next day, I called them. My voice was calm, steady. They came without argument. They sat on the sofa and I faced them in my armchair. "I love you both more than anything," I began, my voice strong. "And because I love you, I have made a terrible mistake. For 3 years, I've been trying to help you with money, but I haven't been helping you. I've been preventing you from learning to help yourselves. And I have been hurting myself." I laid it out plainly. I told them about my savings, my fear. I did not mention the credit card. Not yet. "The financial support stops. Today," I said. The words were final. "There will be no more checks." Sarah looked horrified. "How will I—" "The kids?" Jake's face darkened with anger. "So you're just cutting us off?" "I am not cutting you off," I said, trembling but firm. "I am changing the kind of support I can offer. I can't offer money anymore. It's gone." I turned to Sarah. "You and the kids can move in here, rent-free for 1 year. It's a hand-up, not a handout. But you contribute to groceries. You handle your own bills." She was stunned into silence. I turned to Jake. I placed the credit card statement on the coffee table. "You will pay this back. Every cent. You will get a job, any job, and set up a payment plan. And you will never take what is not yours again." The color drained from his face. He was shamed into silence. "I am still your mother," I said, tears finally coming. "I will always be here to love you, to listen. I will babysit with joy. I will feed you lasagna. But I will no longer fund your lives. I need to be safe in my old age, and I need to know that you are capable, resilient adults. I have robbed you of that chance, and I am sorry." What followed was long, painful, and messy. There were tears and anger and fear. But there was, for the first time, honesty. That was 6 months ago. The transition has been the hardest thing I've ever done. Sarah and the kids moved in. My quiet retirement is gone, replaced by chaotic, beautiful noise. There are toys on the floor and crayon marks on the wall. But there is life here again. Sarah got a full-time teacher's aide job and is studying for her exams. She buys her own groceries. She is tired, but she stands taller. Jake got a job. It's a sales position he hates. But he goes every day. He paid back the first installment on the debt last month. The check was for $50. It was the most meaningful $50 I have ever received. The pattern is broken. In its place is something messier, more complicated, and more real. They don't call me for money anymore. They call to talk about their problems, and now their solutions. They are figuring it out, and I am learning to listen without reaching for my checkbook. I am learning that love can have hard edges and firm boundaries, and still be the softest place in the world to fall. The financial aid has ended, but the true support, I think, has only just begun. The silence after they moved in was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It wasn't a true silence, of course. The house was now full of the thrumming energy of their lives. But within all that noise, there was a new, profound silence between my children and me. I felt like a ghost in my own home. For a few months, there was a fragile attempt at normalcy. Jake did mow the lawn once. Sarah bought groceries as promised, but the dynamic had shifted irrevocably. My suggestions were met with a patient, condescending smile. "We've got it, Mom," Sarah would say, in a tone that clearly meant, "This is our house now, too." It was during a meeting about a grumbling water heater that the new language began to emerge. "It's just," Jake had said, "this house is a lot for you to manage, Mom. It's old. Things are going to keep breaking." "I've managed it just fine for 20 years, I'd replied, a defensive edge in my voice. "But it's different now," Sarah added softly. "There are more of us. The wear and tear is greater, and the property taxes. We looked it up. They've gone up almost 20% since Dad died." The mention of Frank was a low blow. I felt a chill. They were talking about my house as if it were a problem to be solved, a liability. The Tuesday morning it happened, I was actually enjoying a rare moment of peace. My phone buzzed. "Jake. Mom, when you have a sec, can we talk tonight? Sarah and I have an idea we want to run by you about the house's long-term future. Think you'll really like it." The message was innocuous enough, but every word felt loaded. The house's long-term future. My coffee turned to acid in my stomach. The peace of the morning shattered, replaced by a familiar grinding dread. The day passed in a blur of anxiety. By the time evening arrived, my nerves were stretched taut. After the dishes were cleared and the kids were put to bed, we gathered at the kitchen table. The scene was a grotesque parody of that first fateful dinner. "So," Jake began, leaning forward with his hands clasped, "we've been thinking about the future. The thing is, Mom," he continued, his voice smooth, practiced, "managing this asset is becoming a real burden for all of us, but mostly for you." "Asset?" I repeated the word, tasting its cold, impersonal flavor. "The house," Sarah clarified, as if I were slow. "We've been doing a lot of math, looking at the numbers." "Yes," Jake picked up the thread. We think it makes sense for you to just sign the house over to us." The words did not compute. They hung in the air between us, absurd, impossible words. I blinked. "Excuse me?" "Not give," Jake corrected quickly, a slick salesman correcting a minor misunderstanding. "More like a transfer of ownership, for legal and practical reasons." The room began a slow, nauseating spin. The familiar contours of my kitchen wavered. "You want me to give you my house?" I said, each word a stone. Sarah reached across the table and patted my hand. Her touch was dry and cool. "You'd still live here, of course. We'd all live here together. This is your home. That would never change." "Then why?" The question was torn from me. "It's about protection, Mom," Jake said, his voice patronizing. "This way, if something happened to you, we wouldn't have to deal with probate. It just streamlines everything, protects the asset for the next generation." The phrase, "if something happened to you," landed like a physical blow, a casual reference to my death discussed over my own kitchen table. I stared at them. I truly looked at them. I searched their faces for any sign of the children I knew, but I saw only two strangers, their features arranged into masks of pragmatic concern. In that horrifying crystalline moment, the scales fell from my eyes. The 3 years of temporary help, the move back home, it all snapped into a devastating, sickening focus. This had always been the destination. I slowly pulled my hand out from under Sarah's. A cold, hard clarity filled me. I looked at Jake, then at Sarah. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I simply looked at my children, my voice eerily calm. "So," I said, my gaze steady on theirs, "this is an eviction notice?" The silence after they went to bed was a physical presence in the house. I sat at the kitchen table and felt the world tilt. The cold clarity that had allowed me to speak had evaporated, leaving behind a vast, hollowed-out terror. What had I done? What had they become? The urge to scream was a pressure in my throat. I couldn't bear the sight of their faces. I walked to the living room and sank into Frank's old armchair. I wrapped my arms around myself, but the shivering was coming from some deep, internal cold. "Sign the house over to us." The words looped in my mind. They had framed their avarice as care. I was drowning. I needed a voice from outside this house. My hand, trembling, found my phone. I scrolled until I found her name. Janet. My sister. "Linda?" Her voice was groggy with sleep, but alert with immediate concern. "What's wrong?" Just the sound of her voice broke the dam. A sob ripped out of me. "Linda, honey, breathe. I'm here." What happened? I told her about the family meeting. I repeated their phrases verbatim. Transfer of ownership, protect the asset, probate. When I finished, there was a silence on the other end of the line. Then her voice came through, sharp and clear. "They want your house?" Jake, who can't hold down a full-time job, and Sarah, who can't budget. "They think they're in a position to manage a major asset?" Hearing her say it so bluntly was like a bucket of cold water. It was the truth. They say they want to help," I whispered. "Help?" Janet's laugh was short, harsh. "Help themselves to your equity, maybe. Linda, think. When was the last time either of them actually, meaningfully contributed to your household?" I thought about it honestly. The answer was a gut punch. The move-in had only increased my burdens. "I don't know," I admitted, the shame hot on my face. "Exactly," Janet said. "You've been carrying them for so long, you've forgotten what it feels like to stand on your own 2 feet. Janet, what should I do? I feel so trapped." Okay, listen to me, she said, switching into her no-nonsense mode. First, saying no to this does not make you a bad mother. It makes you a sane adult. Protecting yourself is not an act against them. It is a basic act of survival. I let the words sink in. Saying no does not make you a bad mother. Second, you are in over your head. This is financial and legal territory. You need professional advice, an estate planner, a financial advisor. You need to get a clear, cold picture of your own finances. The plan, simple and logical, was a lifeline. But how do I live with them in the meantime? You gray rock them, Janet said firmly. Gray rock? You become uninteresting. A gray rock. When they bring it up, you give them nothing. No emotion, no argument. You say, I've heard your proposal, and I'm considering my options. You do not JADE. Jade? Justify, argue, defend, or explain. Those are the tools they use to wear you down. You take those tools away. You are a fortress, and the drawbridge is up a fortress. The image gave me a sliver of strength. We talked for another hour. By the time we hung up, the hollow terror had not entirely disappeared, but it had been joined by something else. A resolve. I sat in the dark for a long time after. The house was still silent, but the silence felt different now. It was my silence, my territory. They were sleeping in my rooms, but they did not own them. Not yet. The morning of the meeting with my children, my hands trembled. I had practiced the words until they were a mantra. I chose a coffee shop a 20-minute drive away. A bright, impersonal place. Neutral territory. They walked in together, a united front. Jake in his casual jacket, Sarah with her worried mom bun. Hi, Mom, Sarah said, her smile tight. Fancy meeting place. Once we had our drinks, the silence at our table became a thick, tangible thing. I took a shallow breath. I've been thinking a lot about our conversation last week, I began. The one about the house. Their postures shifted immediately. Jake leaned forward, eager. Sarah's eyes narrowed. And I've realized I haven't been helping you the way I thought I was. What do you mean? Sarah asked, defensive. I took the plunge. I am not going to sign over my house to you. The words hung in the air, simple and absolute. And I need to make some significant changes regarding the financial support. It has to stop, Jake exploded, a contained fury. Mom, what the hell? We're family. We're trying to build a legacy. I know you're not asking for charity, Jake, I said, keeping my voice calm. But what I've been doing is called enabling. I am enabling you both to avoid the hard decisions adults need to make. Sarah's face crumpled. So, after everything, you're just cutting us off? No, I said, the word firm. I am setting boundaries that should have been in place years ago. Because I love you. The statement baffled them. I reached into my purse and pulled out my notes. It showed them this wasn't an emotional whim. I've thought about this carefully. And here's what I can offer. I turned to Jake. Jake, I will help with utilities for 3 more months. But it's conditional. I need to see a real budget. Evidence you are actively looking for full-time work. His jaw clenched. He looked away. I turned to Sarah. Sarah, I am happy to help with emergency childcare. But the regular weekly childcare needs to be something you budget for and manage yourself. She shook her head, disbelieving. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. I understand that I raised 2 capable children, I said, my voice gaining strength. And I need to start treating you like the capable adults you are. Jake suddenly stood up, his chair scraping loudly. This is ridiculous, Mom. We're trying to help you, and you're throwing it back in our faces with this corporate bullshit." He was towering over me. Old Linda would have shrunk back, but new Linda stayed seated. "I don't need help with house responsibilities, Jake," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "I have managed this house for 20 years. What I need is for my adult children to become financially independent. That is the only help I want from you now." The silence that followed was absolute. He stared at me, and I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. A flicker of fear. He was afraid of the adult he would now have to become. Jake turned without another word and walked out. Sarah and I were left alone. The battle was over. The first, brutal skirmish. I had held the line, and as I sat there, my heart aching with a grief as profound as any I had ever known, I knew one thing for certain. The old pattern was broken. Whatever came next would be something new. The silence that descended after the coffee shop was a heavy, wounded thing. Jake moved through the house like a sullen ghost. When our paths crossed, he would look right through me. Each silent meal was a tiny incision. The guilt was a physical weight in my chest. Sarah's weapon was tears. The phone calls started within days. "Mom, I don't know what to do," she'd sob. "You're abandoning me when I need you the most." The word abandoning echoed my deepest fear. Every cell in my body screamed to fix it. My finger would hover over the banking app, but then I would remember the charts, the stark red line of my savings. I was not saving her. I was crippling her. So I would close the app. I would take a deep breath. "Sarah," I said during one call, "I am not abandoning you, but I am not going to transfer money. Why don't I come over tomorrow? We can go grocery shopping. We can look at your bills. We can make a plan." The silence on her end was stunned, then resentful. The next day was agonizing. Pushing the cart through the supermarket, I pointed out prices. "We can get apples and cheese sticks for half the cost." It was slow, practical, and unglamorous. But for the first time, she was thinking about the money she was spending. Later, at her kitchen table, we made a budget. She cried when she saw how little was left. I didn't hug her. I just pointed to the number. "This is your reality right now. Knowing this number is the first step to changing it." With Jake, the challenge was his pride. He left his unchanged resume on the counter. "The job market is terrible," he announced. "What skills are you referring to, Jake?" I asked. He floundered. "Project management, client relations." "Those are valuable, but if those opportunities aren't available, what else could you do? What could you be trained to do?" "Let's look at the community college website. IT support, paralegal studies, HVAC, things that are always in demand." He scoffed. "I'm not going to be an HVAC technician." "Why not?" I asked. "It's honest work." "It pays well. It's stable," I held his gaze. "It's independence." The word hung between us. He muttered something and left, but the next day, I saw the community college website open on the laptop. The first few weeks were a brutal test. Every cry, every silence was a temptation to revert. But I held on. I offered my time, my energy, my practical knowledge, the things that actually cost me something of myself. It was infinitely harder than writing a check. But it was real. The 6 month later, Mark arrived with a quiet, almost imperceptible shift. The change was in the accumulation of small, ordinary moments. The first sign was the sound of true silence. A Saturday morning, waking naturally. The house was mine again. The emptiness that had once felt lonely now felt like clean, breathable space. Jake had moved out a month prior. It wasn't dramatic. Over a civil dinner, he'd cleared his throat. "I found a place." I'm splitting it with a guy from the program. He was working 2 part-time jobs. His hands were chapped. There were dark circles under his eyes. My heart ached, but it was the proud, painful ache of watching him fix it himself. "That's wonderful, Jake," I'd said. He'd nodded. "Rent's cheap. I can manage it with the jobs, even after I pay you back for utilities." He was paying me back. Small amounts, transferred with a terse text. It wasn't the money, it was the principle. The day he moved out, he paused at the door. He didn't hug me, but he looked at me. "Thanks, Mom," he'd said, his voice rough. "For the push." Then he was gone. I stood in the sudden quiet and cried. I cried for the struggle he faced, and for the man he was being forced to become. Sarah's transformation was quieter. The frantic energy around her had softened. Her substitute position had turned into something stable. One evening, she came over for a visit. She sat with her laptop. "Look," she said. It was a budget spreadsheet she had created herself. Color-coded. Lines for savings. "I'm putting $50 a month away for the kids," she said, a note of pride in her voice. "It's not much, but it's something." She was also dating someone, a teacher named David. When she'd had car trouble, she told me after it was resolved. David helped me find a mechanic. And I had enough in my emergency fund to cover it. The statement was casual, but its significance echoed. She hadn't called me. She had handled it. I looked at her, calmly sipping her tea, and saw a woman in charge of her life. It wasn't a fairy tale. Our relationships were scarred. Conversations with Jake were still brief. With Sarah, there was a new distance, a boundary she maintained. There were still pangs of guilt. When I bought myself a new washing machine, I felt a twinge. But then I would remember the budget spreadsheet, the chapped hands. I had not bought them comfort. I had given them the gift of competence. 6 months later, things looked different because I was different. The constant, grinding anxiety was gone. The love I felt was no longer tangled with resentment. It was clearer, sharper, and more profound. I loved them for who they were becoming. I walked to the window. The grass needed mowing. It was a task that was mine again. I felt a small, steady sense of satisfaction. The storm had passed. We were all still standing, and we were, each in our own way, finally learning how to build shelters that could weather the next one. The scent of roasting chicken and rosemary filled the house. The air carried the sound of genuine laughter. I stood at the stove, stirring the gravy, and breathed it in. This was what I had fought for. During dessert, Jake cleared his throat. A familiar, old dread whispered through me. He focused on his plate. "So, Mom," he began, his voice quiet. I've been meaning to say something." I set my fork down. "What is it, Jake?" He looked up, his eyes full of a quiet humility that was new. "I owe you an apology." My breath caught. "I was really angry at first," he said. "I thought you were being cruel. I thought you were choosing your money over your family." Each word was a punch to a healing bruise. "But I get it now," he continued, "that you weren't helping us by paying for everything. You were keeping us stuck. You were this safety net that was so comfortable. Why would I ever try to walk the tightrope? It made me lazy. It made me feel entitled to a life I hadn't earned." Tears pricked at my eyes. He saw it. He finally saw it. Sarah placed her hand on his arm. "He's right," she said. "You built a shelter around me. It felt like love, but it was a cage. I never had to test my own strength. But now, I feel actually confident. When the car needed tires, I didn't panic. I solved it. That feeling, Mom, That feeling is better than any check you could have written. I looked at my children, these two capable adults. The journey of the past 6 months flashed before me. I don't need you to apologize, I said, my voice thick. Seeing you like this, strong and independent, that's all the thanks I could ever want. That was the goal. To free you, Jake gave a small, wry smile. Well, it felt like punishment for a while. Stocking shelves at 3 a.m. will do that to you. We all laughed, the sound clean and unburdened. The conversation shifted back to the easy flow of before, but the atmosphere was forever altered. A wall had been dismantled. This is our life now. The connection was never the problem. The poison was the dependency. Now the love flows freely. I still help. Of course I do. I am their mother. But it is the help they need, not just the help they want. A real emergency, met with emotional support, not a financial bailout. Our relationship is no longer a transaction. It is based on what I had always hoped it would be: love and respect. The respect had been the missing ingredient. I had loved them too much to respect their ability to struggle, and they, in their dependence, had lost the ability to respect themselves and me. As they left, the hugs were different. They were firm, warm, full of unspoken understanding. "Love you, Mom," Jake murmured, and for the first time, I heard it not as a prelude to a request, but as a simple, profound statement of fact. I stood at the door, waving as their cars pulled away. The house was quiet again, but the silence was no longer empty. It was filled with the echoes of their laughter and the solid knowledge that we had found our way through. The resolution was this new, quiet reality. The problem had not been solved. It had been healed. The scars were not marks of damage, but reminders of the strength we had all discovered when the false safety nets were finally cut away. I created an informal support group for women with disabilities that has already helped dozens of people report abuse, get out of toxic relationships, and rebuild their lives with dignity. Every week I receive messages from women who manage to free themselves from horrible situations after participating in our meetings. It's my way of transforming pain into purpose, trauma into life mission. My story proves that no matter how old you are, no matter how many traumas you've suffered, no matter how many times you've fallen, it's always possible to start over. The important thing is to never give up, to seek help when you need it, to believe that you deserve good things in life, that you deserve respect, caring, dignity, and most importantly, never let those who hurt you continue to have power over you. I am Linda. I'm 80 years old. I live here in Savannah, and this is the story of my life, of how the worst trauma transformed me into the strongest woman I know. If you want more stories of overcoming like mine, subscribe to the Grandparents' Tales channel. Here we prove that there's no age to start over, and that the sweetest revenge is to live well. So, did you like my story? Today, I feel victorious because I strived as best I could to overcome all difficulties. If you can, click on the squares that are passing on the screen to see more videos and hear more stories of warrior women like me. You'll be surprised at the strength that we American women have to overcome anything that life puts in our way. Life teaches that whoever sows wind reaps storm, and whoever sows evil one day pays the price.